Mr. Speaker, sir,
Callichurn.
I've just heard from the honourable member. He was asking question, who have treated those patients? This is an insult to all those doctors, nurses who've been working round the clock to treat those patients, Mr. Speaker, sir. And it's a shame. Mr. Speaker, sir, allow me to convey my deep sympathy to those who have been affected by the demise of their beloved one due to coronavirus. I also want to acknowledge the tremendous work of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, the COVID-19 High-Level Committee, chaired by the Honourable Prime Minister, and all workers who is working during confinement. This pandemic has shown how vulnerable the world is in time of widespread sanitary threat. The world as a whole has been affected by this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, sir, in Mauritius, since the virus was detected in March, this government took measures which were swift, bold, and decisive. It is due to these measures that today we have been able to contain the virus. Hence, it is vital for the country to prepare to meet the challenges of today and position ourselves for the recovery of tomorrow. Nobody at this stage knows the extent of the real damage we as a nation would be asked to sustain and support, and for how long. As people's representatives, we as members of Parliament are mandated and duty-bound to act, and to act now. The legislation that are before the House have been drafted specifically to address these challenges. There is today widespread agreement among economists around the world that following outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, the global economy has entered in its worst recession period since the Great Depression of 1929. In several countries, governments have responded to the crisis by taking, among others, some exceptional measures and have even relaxed some provisions of the labor law to sustain the economy and to protect employment. Allow me, Mr. Speaker, sir, to cite some of the countries and some of the main measures which have been taken. In Croatia, employers are allowed to cut wages up to the level of the minimum wage. We haven't done that yet. To unilaterally exclude certain rights from collective agreement, to reduce the amount of compensation in case of termination of employment due to COVID-19 pandemic, and to shorten times and wages. They are also a member of ILO. In France, the regular working times of 48 hours per week has been increased to 60 hours per week. The rest day of Sunday has been suspended and work is performed on a 7-day week basis. In Hungary, flexibility has been given to both employees and employers, and they can now deviate from the provision of the labor code in a separate agreement. Portugal, the right to strike in vital services have been suspended. They are also member of the ILO. In India, the state of Uttar Pradesh government has announced approved an ordinance exempting businesses from the purview of almost all labor laws for the next 3 years, except for free legislation regarding construction industry, workmen compensation and bonded labor, and section of payment of wages act regarding right to receive timely wages. Let me remind the House that we import foodstuff from India: rice, pulses, vegetable, potato, onion, which is widely consumed locally. Those workers whose rights have been curtailed for the moment are currently working for us. They are doing the sacrifices that the government has told them to do. Finally, in South Arabia, on 10th of May 2020, the Minister of Finance announced that the standard rate of VAT would be increased to from 5% to 15% with the effect of 1st of July. Mr. Speaker, sir, as I mentioned earlier, Mauritius is no exception and has been severely impacted by COVID-19 pandemic. Our industry are facing the brunt of slowdown, more particularly the tourism sector, the textile manufacturing, and the construction sector as well. Mr. Speaker, sir, as a responsible and caring government, which has at heart the welfare of our fellow workers and the population in general, we are also independent of our will, being called to take some difficult and bold measures in the national interest. The COVID-19 Miscellaneous Provision Bill has been drafted with the objective to keep as many jobs as possible and ensure that the government is sufficiently equipped to respond to this unprecedented situation. Mr. Speaker, sir, it was not my intention to politicize the debates today, but since the interveners before me have indulged into mudslinging, I'm bound to answer some of the criticism. When you do, it's fine. When we do, no. I would like to point out that we do not intend to put in question the acquired rights of the workers, as was previously done by the Labour Party and the PMSD government during the financial crisis in 2008. The House will recall that in 2008, whilst employers benefited from stimulus package, the then government dismantled the fundamental rights of the workers. Where was the leader of the opposition at that time? I did not hear his voice then. I did not hear him talking about the abolishment of the termination of Contract Service Board, which was acting as a watchdog for unscrupulous employers, when same was being butchered by his colleagues of the Labour Party. I ask him a question today. Did you add your voice to the debate then to say, no, please don't abolish the TCSB, as this will give employers a license to fire? The government at that time, Mr. Speaker, sir, replaced the Labour Act by the Employment Rights Act, and amongst others, provided for computation of overtime after 90 hours a fortnight instead of 8 hours a day, and did not proclaim the act which dealt with the payment of night shift allowance. So many workers who were performing overtime at that time, unfortunately, could not get their entitlement because they had to work longer hours to earn it. Another example, Mr. Speaker, sir, there are so many. Unfortunately, due to time constraint, I cannot list them all. They wanted to introduce some amendment to Parliament which purported to allow non-unionized workers to have right to sign collective agreement. I recall CTSP stood against this amendment. The help of the leader of the opposition, Honorable Béranger, was sought by members of the opposition and trade unions. Subsequently, with pressure, they had to drop those amendments. Another example, if a worker was sacked for any reason following disciplinary committee, the employer had nothing to pay under the Labour government, not even the recycling fee, the minimum. They also amended the law to exclude workers who were already on a contract from being covered by a new collective agreement or enactment that offers more favorable terms. All this to say, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we do not have any lesson to take regarding the protection of fundamental rights of our fellow working brothers and sisters of this country. Mr. Speaker, sir, allow me to remind the House that it is under the leadership of Honorable Pravin Jagannath and myself as Minister of Labour that the Workers' Rights Act was enacted to better protect the workers of this country. The protection of the most vulnerable segment of the population is in the DNA of this government. However, the current exceptional circumstances is such that we have no other alternative than to take these measures to respond to the challenges we are faced with. Enterprises also cannot operate without its workforce. There cannot be a decent work without work. They simply cannot exist without each other, and this is the reason why there is a need for common support from all stakeholders. I would like to make an appeal to all the workers of this country to understand the rationale behind the amendments that we are proposing today and thank them in advance for their comprehension. I am confident that their sacrifices in these exceptional circumstances will no doubt help us together as a nation to save jobs and to successfully overcome this crisis. Mr. Speaker, sir, I wish to reassure the working class of this country that the amendments that are being proposed to the Workers' Rights Act and the Employment Relations Act will be temporary. I take the commitment of restoring those rights once the pandemic is over. Mr. Speaker, sir, because of time constraint, I shall limit my intervention this afternoon on the measures that concerns my ministry. As witnessed since the beginning of the confinement, everywhere across the globe, there has been a shift from office work to work from home. These new amendments with regard to work from home will empower the minister to make such regulation to regulate the conditions of employment of a home worker. I want to reassure the workers who will be working from home that their conditions of employment will not be less favorable than their current conditions of employment. Henceforth, an employer will have an obligation to give prior notice to a worker of at least 48 hours before requiring the latter to work from home. This will enable the worker to make necessary arrangements to meet his or her family and personal obligations. Mr. Speaker, sir, the provision of Section 22 previously was restrictive as it enabled a worker to work on flexi-time only where the worker has to care for his children, who is of below school age or had an impairment. The scope of the new provision which is being proposed is being widened by deleting the condition by which the worker may choose to work on flexi-time. The implementation of flexi-time is aimed to assist in accommodating the workplace with necessary social distancing by avoiding crowded workplace. It will undoubtedly help in facilitating the enterprise operational requirements and at the same time allow to reconcile work with family. Mr. Speaker, sir, the night shift allowance of 15% is payable under the Workers' Rights Act, where a worker works at least 5 consecutive hours is temporarily being suspended. Let me remind the House that the Labour government never had the courage to proclaim this section since its introduction in 2013 by Honorable Mohammed, whom I must say had a good intention, but somehow, I guess he was forced by strong lobby not to proclaim. In such difficult time, the payment of night shift allowance will represent an additional cost to employers and is bound to adversely affect their business concern. The proposed amendment would, in the present context, allow reallocation of financial resources for the survival of enterprise to eventually ensure livelihoods of workers and preserving employment for fellow workers with the understanding of reverting back to normal provision when the situation improves and normal activity picks up again. However, in order not to demotivate any worker, employers are encouraged to arrange shift in a manner to allow fair rotation among workers. Mr. Speaker, sir, with a view to alleviating the burden of payroll further, both workers and employers have the duty to build the earning capacity of the enterprise. In such circumstances, worker will still benefit from double pay for work performed on a public holiday, irrespective of the number of hours of work performed. In this exceptional time, exceptional measures are required for alleviating employers from financial burden on the payroll. The specificity of this new section is that employees may be granted paid time off instead of being paid for extra work. It is apposite to note that this measure already exists in the public sector. The granting of paid time off in lieu of overtime payment, however, should not be interpreted as depriving a worker of his entitlement. In case where the worker has not been granted paid time off, his employer will be required to pay any remuneration due for extra work. On the other hand, those workers who have not been granted paid time off and who have not been in a position to take the time off, they will have to be paid remuneration due for extra work for that period. Mr. Speaker, sir, during the actual curfew, employers will be tempted to encourage their employees to use up all their annual leaves with a view to decrease the cost, which would accrue at the end of the year. However, with the proposed amendment, employers can only withhold 15 days for a period of 18 months starting from 1st June 2020 to 30th November 2021. For the period January 2020 to November 2021, the worker will hence be entitled to 38 annual leaves, out of which 15 may be withheld by the employer. May be withheld. It will depend on the employer. Thus, the worker will be entitled to 23 days annual leave if the employer chooses to withhold the 15 days. For those who have worked during the COVID-19 period, they will continue to benefit from the 20 days annual leave for the period 2020 to December 2020. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is very important. I wish to reassure the workers of the private sector that regarding the withholding of the annual leave, which is applicable to them, will also be applicable to the workers of the public sector. Hence, the issue of discrimination between the private sector and the public sector will not arise. However, it is to be noted that annual leave in the public sector is limited to 11. Therefore, the withholding of the leave for them will have to be deducted by a formula yet to be determined. I have the comfort of the Prime Minister on this issue. I fully understand the outcry of the workers and their representatives on the issue of withholding annual leaves by the employer. Mr. Speaker, sir, I have said earlier that exceptional circumstances calls for exceptional measures. Mr. Speaker, sir, our action since the beginning of the pandemic has been systematic. We have provided necessary assistance to both formal and informal sector. We have ensured that the working class is not deprived of their livelihoods. We went an extra mile in providing basic food commodities to the most vulnerable section of the population. The aim of the amendment which is being proposed in section 64 and 70 is to send a clear message to employers under any type of financial perfusion that mass termination of employment due to economic reason will not be acceptable. Maintaining each Mauritian in employment is our mission. The Honourable Minister of Finance and the MRA has been voicing out for quite some time now that it is unacceptable that those enterprises receiving assistance and support from the government lay off workers. This provision will give a strong signal to employers to neither take the authorities for granted, nor benefit from assistance on the back of workers. Thus, it will be a deterrent for workers to unfairly terminate employers, it will be a deterrent for employers to unfairly terminate employment in such a difficult time. In addition, those who have already had recourse to the termination of employment during this period, they would be asked to refund the financial assistance granted to them and pay severance allowance for unjustified termination to the tune of 3-month remuneration per year of service. Mr. Speaker, sir, it appears that there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding regarding the rights of a worker who is temporarily laid off. I would like to clarify the matter. In case a worker has been temporarily laid off, the board will examine the case on the basis of facts and financial situation of the company and will make its determination as in the case of a worker who is permanently laid off. Secondly, where the termination is justified, the worker will be entitled to 30 days wages in lieu of notice. The worker, the same worker, will also benefit from the payment of end-of-year bonus computed on the basis of number of months he has worked during the year, and he will be refunded the remaining balance of his annual leave. In addition to that, the employer would have to fulfill his obligation under the Portable Retirement Gratuity Fund and pay any contribution due from the date of entry to the date of termination. Hence, it is not true to say, as being portrayed outside, that the worker will only be entitled to payment in lieu of 30 days' notice. It is also apposite to mention here that there is a double protection to the worker. In the event that the company has benefited from the financial assistance of the government, it will not be allowed to terminate the employment of the worker. If it does so, it will have to pay severance allowance at punitive rate, that is 3 months per year of service. Furthermore, as the law stands, the worker will, in addition, be admitted to workfare program and will benefit from the payment of the transition of an employment benefit. Mr. Speaker, sir, as regard to the issue of leave without pay under Section 72A, I will not dwell with the issue as the Prime Minister has already canvassed in his speech. I must say that in the event the board decides, following the request by the employer and with the consent of the worker, that the worker may proceed on leave without pay, he will be provided with an income security. That is, he will also benefit from the transition and employment benefit with the amendment that the government is bringing today. Therefore, the government is sending a strong signal to the working class that no worker is being left behind in such a difficult time. In fact, every possible step is being taken to ensure livelihood of workers irrespective of their employment status. Mr. Speaker, sir, the PRGF was introduced by the government to safeguard the interests of the workers who previously did not benefit from the whole length of service. The regulation provides for the contribution to be effective as from January 2020. However, the provision of this regulation could not be implemented for the reasons mentioned by the Prime Minister. In the view of the exceptional circumstances following COVID pandemic, the amendments being proposed do not in any manner whatsoever impinge on the rights of the workers. Employers will still have to fulfill their obligation for payment of the contribution. What is being proposed, Mr. Speaker, sir, is only a delay for payment of contribution. I will make a regulation and will cater for the following situation. Firstly, in case of retirement, the worker will still be entitled to full payment of his gratuity for the whole length of service. Secondly, in case of termination of employment, the employer will have to pay contribution for the whole length of service of the worker to the MRA. Thirdly, in the case of resignation, the employer will have to pay contribution as from January 2020. With regard to payment of gratuity, I wish to point out that a worker will not be paid an amount less than 15 days of remuneration per year of service. I wish to reassure workers that they will not lose anything. Regarding the last issue, Mr. Speaker, sir, Employment Relations Act, it is known fact that Mauritius is heavily dependent on import of food items and other basic commodities. The amendment that is being proposed to the Employment Relations Act is specifically designed to prevent any disruption of the activities at the port and the airport. I would like to refer, Honourable Member, to ILO principle, who Honourable Mohammed also made reference to, but to a different section. According to ILO, in the circumstances of extreme gravity, where there is interruption of certain services, which would endanger the life, personal safety, or health of the whole or part of the population, caused economic hardship could prove disastrous in other countries and rapidly lead to conditions which might endanger life and personal safety or health of the population. The right to strike may be entirely or partly waived in service with a priority which does not fall within the definition of essential service. Example, our country has known similar situation in the past. I'm referring here to striking the port in the 1970s. The Labour Party knows about it. Had the then government not taken immediate action, the population would have been deprived of the supply of basic commodities. Nonetheless, let me remind the House that we are far from impinging on the right of the workers and trade unions. We are rather helping them, since if there is any dispute, the matter can be dealt with expeditiously by the ERT. In any event, I have the power under the Act to make regulation to suspend to limit the time in which this provision is applicable. Mr. Speaker, sir, on a concluding note, words won't suffice to describe the extent of the damage caused by COVID-19 to human, social, and economic activities across the globe, or narrate the amount of human suffering taking place. Everywhere, government and the public authorities, private enterprises, and NGOs are working hard, hand in hand, to limit further propagation and contamination of COVID-19 and to avoid its resurgence. The protection of the people's health is of paramount importance. At the same time, government are keen to restart economic activities under strict, specific guidelines and conditions as applicable to what we term most essential activities and less essential activities. By now, all Mauritians are conscious of the extremely grave socio-economic situation we are in. They read and see and know what is happening elsewhere. Exceptional times calls for exceptional measures, and the government is doing its level best to protect enterprises to ensure their survival in the post-pandemic era in order to protect jobs and therefore the livelihood of the workers and their income. A special appeal is being made to the unions and employers' representatives to engage in constructive dialogues in the interest of all stakeholders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.